Hello, friends. Welcome to LWVCO's Alternative Voting Methods Task Force. I'm Beth Hendricks. I'm the Executive Director of the League of Women Voters of Colorado. And wow, am I not an expert in alternative voting methods. So I'm really glad that some people are here who are. Neil McBurnett and Jen Cleland will be presenting this evening on a study that's been being worked on for just over a year now on primary election reform. Neil, Jen, shall I just hand it right over to you?
I'm going to hand it to Neil because he's the one who knows about this.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm going to say up front that that this is a little unexpected because we had been working under the assumption that the primary author of the study, Marcus Ogren, would be able to join us tonight, but that was miscommunication on our part. So sorry about that, and that means that we're a little less prepared than we'd like to be. But I think we can still profitably have some discussion about this. I'll just warn you that it's a really interesting, important, and complicated topic because it mixes together all the things that interact different voting methods, both single winner and multi-winner election methods, and primaries versus generals, and a lot of other aspects. So we're going to tee it up here. We're going to have another discussion with Marcus at the um, uh, league's annual meeting. And we don't have a lot of time set aside for him to talk then, but that's what we have. But let's dive into this. And Jen, I think I should just share. You don't have any slides, right? I don't have any slides. I think
Yeah, I got nothing.
I should just link to the primary study, which is, um, let's see, not quite there, but here in the chat, if you open it up, you will see the study itself. Actually, what you will find there is the current draft of the study itself, which is already quite impressive in its comprehensive nature, but it links to several appendices which have lots more information. So, again, we can't profitably dive into the details here, but I think it's safe to say that the reason for this is that the league has much interest in voting methods, but has historically uh, not stepped into the primary election world, really. The primaries have been viewed historically because historically they were sometimes entirely, I mean, centuries ago they were just proverbial smoke-filled rooms run by parties who decided who they were going to run in a in uh, in the general election. And then over 100 years ago, there was a reform movement that said, "Gosh, we should have public elections to do that and get the decisions out of smoke-filled rooms." And but nevertheless, those elections were mostly just for party members. And again, the league said, we don't do partisan politics, so we're not going to involve ourselves there. The more recent and hugely important reform is to say, wow, with increasing polarization, most of the um, districts, probably both state, but certainly federal level, are heavily tilted, gerrymandered often to one party. And so the only meaningful election from the standpoint of actually making a choice is the primary. And if the league cares about process and having representation for the voters, that's an important place to be. And that's what the people have decided, and we've done that in Colorado. So now we allow unaffiliated voters to vote in either, only one, but either primary any of the primaries that might happen for a party. But if you're a party member, you can only vote in your own primary or your own caucus or whatever. So in that environment where primaries are increasingly open to the public and increasingly important for the final winner, because they often essentially determine the final winner, we think, just as a starting point, that it's critical for the league to weigh in here. And that's a great thing, but it's also a complicated thing, as you'll see if you dive through the document here. I'll also just note that an important framing consideration is how would the league do this? The normal way that the league approaches things like this is via a study. And the normal way to do a study is to come up with a topic and a bunch of questions and send that out to local leagues for people to sit in the grassroots space that the league is so famous for encouraging, and think through some of the tough problems in their local context with these complicated problems. And so actually it's great to have Beth here, because Beth understands process in the Colorado League. And at some point, are any members of the league board on the call at this point?
I think I
State
saw
League
Barb
board?
Winery.
Barb, okay.
Yep,
So
I am.
Barb, so at some point, thank you, Barb.
Betsy's a past president.
Yeah, well, I mean, we have expertise and we've had advice, and some of us have participated in previous studies and position adoption. So, the exact question of how to do this is something that needs to be left up to a formal proposal and the board and the members ultimately. But the notion that we have at this point is that, unlike, let's say, the election security position, where it was pretty clear what we ought to be saying as a league, and we just drafted a position and had a statewide meeting to discuss it and get feedback and adopt some updates, and then just brought it to the general meeting. Here we think it is probably going to be important to both to do some education, which is a natural part of the normal study process, and to get input from the members. So unfortunately, it's such a big and intertwined and necessarily complex process that will be challenging. So we're kind of still wrestling with how to make that productive and successful and so on. But I will briefly kind of go through the executive summary in the document that I shared in the chat, and give you a sense for where we're thinking at this point. And I'll pause at that point to ask if there are questions, or to ask if Jen has any input, because I'm just winging it at this point, or to just take a breath.
You're doing great.
Any questions from anybody?
Yes.
Betsy.
So did at the state convention, did the delegates vote to have the study?
So there has been no official communication, really, even with the board or the executive director, that I know of. Maybe Beth knows more than I do.
Yes. Thanks, Neil. A couple 4 years ago, the statewide membership voted to change the process from needing to request permission for a study to providing notification that they would like to put on a study. So the board received notification that this group
Okay,
wanted to
you.
do a study. Yep.
Thank you.
Looking to make it more grassroots.
Mhm.
And but the study has not yet been brought to the board for official approval. And then the next step, it would go to the membership. Well, I mean, I would think there would be kind of a statewide campaign to educational campaign ahead of the vote.
So
Or
so the kind of the scope already exists, and will the board have a role in approving the questions?
I don't know that the board wants to approve the questions.
Okay.
I think we want the study people to, the true experts to develop the questions. And we would certainly weigh in on the question during the approval process, because everything will come to the board before it goes to membership.
Yeah, I agree, and we also give feedback maybe on terms of whether the questions are on mark or not, and in a sense give some suggestions, but it's usually the study group that's taking the lead with that.
That makes sense. Thank you both for clarifying some of the history. That and it would probably be great if we got a link, because I don't know that this is in the study yet. If we got a link to some of those process documents, so whatever was voted on that established, some of the flexibility in the process that is an option that we may not be using, but just to set it up for readers and for the board to remember, where have we been and where do we, what are the options for going forward? So that's very helpful. Thank you. Other questions? I mean, I'll continue talking, but I didn't want to, that's in terms of the process. That's what I had. So kind of working through the executive summary, which I shared in the chat. It basically starts by framing the point that I made a minute ago, that primaries are increasingly important. They're increasingly the places where decisions get made. We have seen primary reform around the country in a variety of different ways. The study tries to document how that's not working as well as we would like, and comes up with some new ideas for how to do that. And so one of the things that is most interesting in the process of putting the documentation together and doing the research and putting the study together is naming kind of what it is that is not working. And so we came up with the name ignorable opposition problem. So the ignorable opposition problem is, let's say that if you have separate primaries for, let's say, Republicans and Democrats, and if it's a foregone conclusion that, let's say, Republicans are going to win the seat because of the number of Republicans in the district, then the Republicans don't really care who runs in the Democratic primary, who wins the Democratic primary. It just doesn't really matter to them. And similarly, the Democrats, if they're not allowed to vote in the Republican primary, are like, we can't choose among the people that you're putting forth, and we don't have, you don't really care what our opinions are at all. You're just going to choose who you want to choose, and we're going to end up saying, gosh, we don't like that person, but really, again, with no way to, no reason for the dominant party in that particular district to care what the non-dominant party cares about. And this happens absolutely in all directions. You know, it happens in safe seats for Democrats, it happens in safe seats for Republicans. I don't know that we have any safe seats for other parties, but if we did, it would be the same problem, unless we fix the historical way we've done primaries. And a lot of people have understood that, and that's why it's been driving this primary reform. Colorado actually had a major primary reform just a few years ago, which is what allowed unaffiliated voters to vote. And by the way, over half of the state's registered voters are unaffiliated with a party. And I just heard a presentation from Matt Crane the other day, who has a lot of background in this and has looked at it. And it is sometimes said that that's just because you register at the Division of Motor Vehicles for most parts, and they don't really talk to you about parties, and nobody is paying any attention when they fill out the part of the form that says, yes, you know, I can go ahead, register me to vote. He said that trend has been happening long before that change was made to the motor voter law. So people just don't want to register with parties, and they do still want to have a say in elections. So we're trying to accommodate that. And so back to this ignorable opposition problem, we think that framing it that way and naming that is helpful in assessing, and the major part of the study is assessing how do the various primary reforms work, and even what are the names for them, because when you say open primary, different people have different notions for what it means to be open. Does that mean it's open to everybody and everybody runs in it? Not necessarily. Does that mean, like we do, you can vote if you're unaffiliated? Some people kind of think of it that way. I'm probably even not going to say it right, but the study, you know, we've thought carefully and researched how people talk about these terms. And again, that's what's driving a lot of this. So we want to solve the ignorable opposition problem. And we look at the reform that they had in California, where they have a top two multi-winner primary, which says there's only two people going to show up in the general. That is causing lots of problems, as you might read in the news these days. We've looked at Alaska's approach, which is like what Colorado proposed a few years ago. And there are ways that helps, but there are ways that it fails to help. And we go into detail in the study. We've looked at other approaches like St. Louis, where they actually have a two-winner approval voting election in the, you can't quite call it a primary because I don't think they're partisan, but in an early election followed by a single winner plurality in the in the final election. So there's a lot of approaches, and we try to analyze those and come up with options. And one of the results of all this study is that there are some new voting methods, in particular star voting, which has been trialed in some places in Oregon, and Condorcet voting, which is really a family of methods, but it avoids some of the other problems that we've seen, which might well be good options for something like the Alaska system, but with a better method in the general election. So, you know, I'm not, given that I realized today that somebody needed to try to lead us through this, I don't have a great way of running through what's in the study, but I think we would love to have insights from people about how it can be presented and whether the conclusions make sense, and input from you all. We will continue to discuss this at different, you know, at the general meeting and when we have the document in its final form, because it's not finalized. It's still a draft. But the executive summary is probably a good place to start ruminating about. And those with expertise in different aspects of this are welcome to help us figure out how to present this to the membership in a way that gets quality input from the membership and educates the membership. I mean, this is important to understand even if nothing changes, but I think it's just in summary important for the league to start getting active in primaries, and this is really a massive effort to try to do that. And I really need to point out that Marcus Ogren is the one who wrote nearly all of the draft and 4 appendices and has done tremendous research and has been talking with Celeste and I for the last couple of years, and some other folks that have been, really insightful with how to present the information or how to, how to think about certain aspects of it.
Neil, we do have a question from Betsy.
Excellent. Betsy, go for it. You're good at questions, Betsy. Thank you.
So is the 2 things. Is the objective to come up with as close to the ideal as you can? And is that something that, like the Colorado League did before, maybe to drop into the lap of the National League? But the second thing I would say is the problem we ran into in Idaho with open primaries on our ballot was we didn't have enough to say about why it mattered, or where it had been changed, what had been the result in terms of public participation or less hate in government, or so to get to what is the goal at the end of the rainbow that we can offer our voting public.
That's really well framed, and I appreciate you for doing it. So I would say that yes, the goal is to certainly for the Colorado League to address the question and come up with a proposal for Colorado that would move us forward. And that will be a more specific, set of what are the changes for the primary, what are the changes for the general, how do they work together? I mean, some of the things proposed in here are completely get rid of the primary and just let everybody vote in the general, which raises its own issues about how to have a productive general election with lots of candidates and a better voting method, or other approaches. So yes, the goal is to present the kind of study that I think you're saying would have been helpful in Idaho, to gather a lot of data on a lot of different effects of reforms in different states over the years, and point out the problems and maybe even come up with better ways to describe them. And I think the ignorable opposition problem is a principal one that is hopefully easy enough to explain that it'll have traction. But then in terms of broader goals, I'm really glad that you mentioned the participation piece, because I think everyone knows that a huge problem with primaries, especially given that they're often the determining election, that really is where the competition is biggest for who is going to win. That big election is happening with among the smallest turnouts in our democracy. You know, sometimes it's only party members, and they're not usually, you know, a lot of them are not well informed, and so only the most active members, and sometimes only the most partisan members, are really even paying attention and coming out to vote. So we think that if you make a good reform, it will make the whole process more interesting to people to participate in. Because I think, you know, we often talk about voter participation as if the main thing is you got to make it really easy to register and really easy to vote. And Colorado has done a standout job in both of those realms. And we have better participation, better turnout than hardly any state. But you still look at how people participate in particular primaries and in even particular elections in the general, and people don't care. You know, people don't tend to vote very much if, well, certainly there's only one candidate on the ballot or even two, and they don't really think there's a competition there. So competition is what leads to the most, you know, the most interest and the most participation, the biggest turnout. And so making primaries more interesting will help solve that major aspect of the primary problem. So thank you, Betsy. That was an important thing that I didn't mention. Other questions? And I do recommend just
Susan?
looking.
Oh, I'm sorry
please,
to
Susan,
interrupt
yes,
you, Neil.
please do.
So I'm really not knowledgeable about some of this, but I increasingly am concerned about the pressure that is put on candidates who don't toe the party line specifically, that they will be primaried, quote, primaried by another candidate. And that has become a fear factor in primaries and in candidates running in primaries. And can any of these approaches help with that? Am I making, is that clear?
No, that is absolutely clear. I mean, the fact that we have a verb that is now to primary someone
Right.
indicates, first of all, how powerful the technique is, and the fear is real, and you see it really controlling a lot of aspects of politics these days. So I'm really glad, once again, that you all who are paying attention are reminding me of things that that are discussed in the study for sure, and which I think the study addresses. And the way it addresses it is by basically saying, you know, the only reason that a party can threaten a potential candidate or an incumbent with being primaried is because the party has control in those places over the primary election, either because they're not allowing other people to vote, or because they have really effective candidate rules. You know, you have to get a high threshold for number of petition signatures, or, you know, make your way through the party's convention process or whatever. So the general theme, I mean, one of the things that we're certainly going to present to in the consensus questions and to the local groups looking at this, is something like what was done in Alaska, where all candidates run in the primary in a single election, which tees up the general election by winnowing the number of candidates down in some way. So if you do that, and if you now presumably at the same time, although all of these things are tricky parts of the rules to think about, if it's easier for people to petition on to the ballot because they can get signatures from anybody, or if there are other adjustments to how you become a candidate in the primary, all of that can make it easier for people to be considered, and most importantly, be considered by the entire electorate rather than just a particular party. So it reduces party control, and that should really reduce the effectiveness of this kind of threat. There is also a section in the document that talks about how sometimes it's popular these days to denigrate parties in general, but parties actually fill an important role in American elections, and they find and promote candidates, and they sometimes have or can have consistent policy and platform approaches and so on. So it's not that we're trying to eliminate the benefits that we get from parties. And so we need to respond to fears that this will make parties either irrelevant or reduce the ways that they can help with elections. So that's another aspect of how all this comes up, and that's kind of the last part of the executive summary. But that's another great question. Thank you, Susan. I hope that helped. Tom, you're muted, Tom.
Thank you. Yeah, some of my questions are a bit unformed because I don't know what's in here, but as sort of a segue of what you're saying about you don't want to make parties ineffective with the idea of the open primary where everybody can join in. Wouldn't you want to give the party some say in who they endorse or who they in that scenario? And then if that's the case, won't the parties go back to doing the caucus to decide who they endorse, and then effectively you have 3 elections? I mean,
interesting. So, the document discusses different ways to deal with who shows up on the primary, and to deal with endorsements. And, as you're thinking and suspecting, and it's true, there are different ways to approach that. One way is to have all the party involvement really revolve around endorsements, and to allow them to endorse maybe multiple candidates, not just in a primary, but in the general election. So we have a practice of fusion voting in a number of states, I think especially in the East Coast, where there's a whole grid of who the candidate is and who the parties are and which parties endorse which candidates. And, there's good things about that. And it is very explicit about saying we're not trying to take, the endorsement notion away, or we're not trying to limit the speech of parties. They get to say whatever they want, and they can make those decisions however they want, especially if you can also have other parties that say, well, what we're really looking for is fiscal responsibility, or we're really looking for, other aspects that can be cross-cutting and where it can make a difference. So, yeah, all of these are parts of of why it's complicated and why we think it's important for the league to think about these things in an organized way.
I think one of the in the past proposal that was voted down, one of the incentives of doing something like this is because you want taxpayer-funded elections to allow everybody to vote, and instead of just subsidizing two major parties, it allows everybody to participate. But then if parties are involved, they're still going to want to say who's on their list, so they're going to have their own parties vote, but without taxpayer funding to decide that, I think.
Yeah, I can certainly imagine parties, reacting in various ways and being interested in maximizing how they put their position forward. And I think your point reminds me that there was a recent Colorado Supreme Court decision that said that one of the provisions of the recent reform in Colorado that did pass, there's a provision, I think it says, and somebody will correct me, I hope, if I'm wrong, that a party could make an internal party decision with 3/4 or more of their internal vote to say, we don't like this idea of letting unaffiliated vote in our election. We're going to opt out of that and just have it for party members. I forget all of the details, but I think the Supreme Court basically said that's a really high bar and you can't do that, but it didn't say exactly what needs to be done. So this is still, even how Colorado's process works is still a little bit fluid. And, the arguments pro and con in that case are very relevant to the aspect you're bringing up and to primary reform in general.
Yeah, I can imagine say the Republicans do decide to withdraw and do their own caucus, then the semi-open primary structure we have right now might even fall apart is in its goal of including the unaffiliated. And I don't know what will happen, but I can imagine that.
I don't know if both parties did that, we would be back kind of where we started. If only one party does it, I don't know. I mean, it certainly would allow for a more focused decision on who the party wants to put forward as a candidate. But I think there's a lot of benefit to a party to having, ballots show up and people talking about all of their candidates in a way that unaffiliated people can vote. And so I think they would lose exposure, and a party, suppose the Democrats continue to be open, I think that's going to be a benefit for candidates that want to appeal all the way across the election, so across the electorate. So, there's going to be some gaming going on in terms of what effect that would have. Other questions?
Yeah.
or
Yeah,
follow-ups?
Deb has a question. Deb, would you like to come off mute and ask a question?
Yeah, here I am, I think.
Yes.
Try to get my video. Hang on. All right. Yeah. So I'm wondering if any of the possible alternative primary processes address the issue or help mitigate the issue of excessive money influencing primary and other election outcomes.
Thank you, Deb. Yeah, I don't think we talk in the study much at all about finance, and it's a critical issue. I'll just note a couple of the things that I'm aware of, because I think they're kind of separable, but everything is related, so I won't claim too much there. But there are two things that are exciting to me in the well, three things actually in campaign finance. One is the effort in Maine to say Citizens United is one thing. If I get this right, it says that you can't stop a political action committee from spending as much as they want. But it doesn't say that you can't stop them from, again, if I get this right, getting donations from anywhere they want, because the issue is really quid pro quo. And we have seen, examples where people were prosecuted in New Jersey for quid pro quo corruption in ways that essentially sidestepped some of that. So Maine basically said you can have laws on how much you can donate to a PAC, and that could have a really major benefit in the way that we used to have with PAC expenditures. And that is in the courts now, and I think a lot of us are hoping that will be one good thing. Another is taking place in Montana, if I remember correctly, or North Dakota, maybe Montana, where they're basically going to say there is an initiative that I think has not yet gathered signatures, but has been approved. Again, I'm speaking off the top of my head, that says no chartered organization gets to spend any money on politics. And it applies to nonprofits, it applies to for-profits, it applies to anyone who has articles of incorporation. And it basically says, we get to decide who incorporates, and if you want to incorporate, you have to abide by our law that says you can't donate not only to candidates, but you can't donate to issue campaigns either. So that would be a pretty big change, and there are different arguments about whether that would pass constitutional muster, but that's another approach to dealing with campaign finance. And then in the absence of any of that, I'm really excited to see what Seattle is doing, which is vouchers to all citizens that they can spend on any candidate they want. So they'll give them, all citizens get maybe 4 $25 vouchers. And if you don't spend them, nothing happens. But if you spend them, you can designate each one for a candidate, and thereby, use, infuse that campaign with funds. And I think that approach could make a big difference. But this study does not address any of that.
Well, I think it could be really helpful as you're thinking about how do we formulate questions, and also what are the most important things to try to communicate to members, to look at each of your bullet points or whatever from the standpoint of, and how does money fit into this? Because money fits into everything. There's no such thing as issues which money does not, interact with. So just to keep that as one of the lenses that you use while you're trying to figure out how to move forward with this.
I think that's well framed. Whether or not we take a position on how money would flow, if we forget that all of this could be sideswiped by, some effective extra new approach. Yeah, that's a really good thought.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that you make suggestions. I think what I'm suggesting is that you consider, given current circumstances, current Supreme Court decisions, current practices in Colorado and other states, what would happen if we implemented X, Y, or Z. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Cool.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions?
Can I say
something? Great. Tom again.
Sorry, I didn't press the button.
You're good.
In the same vein, I think you should consider what it does with minor parties and major parties versus minor parties. Do minor parties get pushed down lower to where, they're not participating, or they get raised in their participation? Or at least their visibility, I guess, not participation, but That is a
So I
concern.
definitely think part of the expectation is that if we have elections at all levels that deal with the spoiler problem, that all of a sudden has a huge benefit for all candidates, both minor party candidates and challengers, whether they're people being primaried or people who want to primary, or within the major parties, that everyone gets the same visibility. And in particular, at least by the time you get through the general, you will have data on what support level there is for all the different perspectives out there. So that's absolutely a factor, and we do discuss that. I know that the minor parties were concerned with the particular way that the Initiative 131 was framed, and I think it's important to learn from that. Good question. Anything else? If there's nothing else, I don't know if there's anything else on the agenda, but
Well, actually, Jesse, would you like to come off mute and just talk about what you just said or written? If not, I'm happy to read it.
Sure. If you can't correctly identify the problem, you can't fix it, which is what that first meme is. You can't make single member district systems work better and not you're not addressing the real problem. The real problem is that people aren't fairly and accurately represented. And all of these systems that are single member district systems, any one of them, doesn't matter which one, all distort representation and exclude people and waste votes. So if you want to address the big problems here, which are wasted votes and distorted outcomes, then you need to go to a multi-member district system. And any type of single member district system leaves all the problems with single member districts in place. You're not addressing those. And I think it's a mistake to pursue any kind of single member district solution, because you're not going to fix the problems. You're still going to exclude people, you're going to waste votes, and you're going to distort outcomes.
Yeah, no, I agree entirely. This
So-
proposal
so
is
the
not
whole
just talking
paper-
about districts, it's talking about governor and lieutenant governor and secretary of
It's-
state and all the other elections. And the league has been on record for how many years now supporting proportional representation for multi-member approaches. So this is in no way trying to either ignore or supplant the many efforts that we have in many different forums to promote proportional representation.
Well, then what put effort into it?
Because we still
Right.
vote for governor.
Well, all right.
So you want to move to a parliamentary system, maybe. That's another thing we could talk about.
So for example, Boulder County has fewer than 1,000 people attending the Boulder County Democratic Party County Assembly. And at the county assembly, they determine ballot access. And in order to get on the ballot, you either have to get, I think it's 1,000 signatures or 30% of the vote at the county assembly. So a lot of people are excluded by that county assembly process. And we end up usually getting only one person to vote for on the primary ballot, which is not much choice. I mean, I don't see how people call it a democracy if there are no competitive elections. And you know in advance that 72 to 79% of all of the votes for any county office are going to be for the Democrat prior to the election. So we know in November that the Democrats are going to win with 72 to 79% of the vote in Boulder County, except for the ones who are completely unopposed, who'll get 100% of the votes. So all these systems are just lipstick on a pig. The pig is single member districts that exclude people, waste votes, and distort outcomes. And
Well,
to
but come back to the question. I mean, again, we're not. We would agree entirely, and we are pushing with your help. I know in various places for proportional representation in county commissioner, in county level offices that are single winner, and those are all exactly the places where having an open primary that was having an all candidate primary would allow a a liberal candidate who was more open to conservative votes to maybe do better and certainly make a running and make a showing and show what the people are interested in, rather than having the current practice where that is very strong for incumbents and very strong for a single winner coming out of a partisan primary. So it absolutely addresses the both local and state level single winner contests, which we will continue to have unless we have really massive change to a parliamentary system. But it in no way takes away from our push everywhere to do proportional representation.
am I allowed to give a plug for home rule in this forum, Beth?
If you are, Jesse, I'll give you 20 seconds to express your personal opinion as an individual citizen voter.
We're gathering signatures for a home rule petition, and we're up against a big wall of 13,500 signature requirements, which is more difficult than getting a governor onto the ballot in the state of Colorado to get home rule on the ballot in Boulder County. It's 16 times more difficult to get home rule on the ballot than it is to get a congressional candidate on the ballot. And I would appreciate any help from anybody here who would like to see more nuanced systems of elections in Boulder County to help gather signatures for the home rule petition. And Beth, I know you have my contact info.
I do, but why don't you put it in the chat for anybody?
I'll put it in the chat.
Cool.
Yeah.
And you can go to Substack. I've written a pitch for home rule on my Substack. And if you just look for Jesse Cumin, you can find the home rule pitch or do a search for it. And I'll put the links for both of those in the chat. Thank you, Beth.
Thank you, Jesse. Neil?
That's all I got. If there's nothing else, we can give people their time back. Really appreciate everything
Great.
you're doing, Jesse. You're bringing up really important issues, and they're not quite here. We've got an elections task force that deals with a lot of things in that realm too. But thank you. And thanks
Well,
to everybody else.
Neil, Jen, everyone who it is and has assisted in this study, it's incredibly impressive. Thank you so much for your nimbleness, your flexibility in presenting this evening, and thanks for your support of best voting practices and democracy in general in Colorado.
Well, Beth, thank you for bravely stepping into the chair role here and convening us. And
I do not claim the chair role.
well, yeah, the convener, you got us coming. So thank y'all.
Thank you all. Take care. Good night.
Save the
We'll be
chat
in
if you want
touch.
to chat. Don't close it until everybody has a chance to get all the info in the chat.
I just added my links for the home rule pitch
Super.
and for my contact info.
Super. Thank you.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay.
Take care, y'all.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.